Don't touch my car. The words snapped through the still air like a door slamming shut, sharp enough to make Nia Brooks stop mid-step on the gravel shoulder, her breath catching in her throat as she looked toward the stranded sedan angled awkwardly beside the road. Its front tire collapsed into a useless ring of rubber. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the empty two-lane highway that stretched for miles without another soul in sight, the heat from the asphalt rising in soft waves that blurred the horizon. Nia shifted the strap of her worn backpack higher on her shoulder, her sneakers scuffed from double shifts and long walks, her hoodie thin against the dry wind that carried the faint smell of dust and engine oil. The old man stood beside the car, one hand gripping the door frame like it might steady more than just his balance, his gray beard catching the light, his expression tight, guarded, as if help came with conditions he wasn't willing to accept. "You might need it anyway," Nia said quietly, her voice steady, not challenging, just certain, and before he could respond, she stepped closer, crouching beside the damaged wheel as small stones pressed into her knees through the fabric of her jeans. The metal of the rim was hot to the touch, the lug nuts stiff from neglect, and for a moment all that existed was the sound of her breath and the faint ticking of the engine cooling down. A car sped past without slowing, the rush of wind tugging at her sleeves, but she didn't look up. Her fingers found the jack, positioning it carefully, her movements practiced, efficient, learned not from lessons but from necessity, from years of figuring things out when no one else would. "You don't have to do that," the man muttered, his tone less sharp now, more uncertain, but she just shook her head slightly, tightening the wrench with a controlled pull, the metal giving way with a small, stubborn creak. Another vehicle approached, slower this time, the driver glancing over before shaking his head and continuing on, leaving behind nothing but the fading hum of tires against pavement. Nia's hands darkened with grease as she worked, the sun dipping lower, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow, and still she didn't stop. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask what he could give. She just kept going, because the moment called for it, because something in her refused to walk away. The old man watched in silence now, his earlier resistance replaced by something harder to read, something quieter, his eyes following every movement, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Minutes passed, measured only by the turning of the wrench and the slow lift of the car, until finally the new tires settled into place, solid and secure. Nia leaned back slightly, catching her breath, her shoulders rising and falling as she wiped her hands on the edge of her hoodie, leaving dark streaks behind. For a brief second, the world felt still again, the road empty, the air warm, the light soft against the edges of everything. And then she stood, brushing the dust from her knees as if it were nothing, as if the effort hadn't cost her anything at all. "You're good to go," she said simply, stepping back, already turning away before he could respond, her footsteps quiet against the gravel as she walked back toward the road, leaving behind a man who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just stood there watching her go, as if the moment had shifted something he hadn't expected to change. The gravel crunched softer with each step as Nia Brooks walked away from the roadside, the fading heat of the day settling into a quiet dusk that wrapped around her like a thin blanket, her hands still carrying the faint smell of rubber and metal as she flexed her fingers, feeling the ache settle into her knuckles in a way that was familiar, almost comforting, like proof that she had done something that mattered even if no one else saw it. The highway stretched ahead, long and empty, the occasional car passing without slowing, their headlights beginning to flicker on as the sky shifted from gold to a muted blue, and Nia kept her pace steady, her backpack bouncing lightly against her back with each step, the worn fabric brushing against her shoulder. She did not look back, not because she was afraid of what she might see, but because she had already decided that whatever came from that moment was not hers to wait for. A mile down the road, she reached the narrow side street that led toward her neighborhood, a quiet stretch of small houses and uneven sidewalks where porch lights flickered on one by one like signals in the growing dark. The air felt different here, softer, carrying the faint scent of someone cooking dinner nearby, and for a moment her stomach tightened, reminding her that she had not eaten since early morning. She adjusted her pace, slower now, conserving what little energy she had left as she turned onto the cracked walkway leading to her house, A modest place with peeling paint and a small front yard that had more patches of dirt than grass. The screen door creaked softly as she pushed it open, stepping inside where the air was cooler, quieter, the hum of an old fan spinning lazily in the corner filling the silence. "You are home?" Her mother's voice called gently from the small bedroom down the hall, fragile but warm, and Nia exhaled softly, dropping her backpack by the door before walking toward her, her footsteps light on the worn wooden floor. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice softer now, the edge of the outside world fading as she stepped into the room where her mother lay resting, a thin blanket pulled up to her chest, her face pale, but her eyes kind. Nia sat beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her mother's forehead, careful, deliberate, as if every movement carried meaning. "Long day?" her mother asked, a faint smile forming, and Nia nodded once, though the story stayed in her chest, unspoken, because it did not feel like something that needed to be explained. "Just work," she said simply, even though she had not made it to her shift, even though the world had shifted in a way she could not yet define. Outside, the last light of day slipped below the horizon, leaving the street in a calm, quiet shadow, and inside, the small house settled into stillness, the kind that held both struggle and peace in equal measure. Hours later, as night deepened and the neighborhood fell silent, a distant sound rolled through the air, low and unfamiliar, like engines moving slowly. Somewhere far off, but Nia did not hear it, already asleep in the next room, her breathing steady, unaware that something set in motion on that empty road had not ended when she walked away, but had only just begun. The night air settled thick and quiet over the small street as the distant hum of engines grew louder, no longer a passing sound, but something deliberate, something approaching with purpose, the low vibration rolling across the pavement and into the thin walls of Nia Brooks's home, where everything inside remained still, her mother asleep in the next room, and Nia herself curled beneath a worn blanket, her breathing slow and even, unaware of the shift unfolding just beyond her door. One by one, dark vehicles turned onto the narrow street, their headlights cutting clean lines through the darkness, illuminating cracked sidewalks and faded fences as neighbors' porch lights flickered on in cautious curiosity, curtains parting just enough for quiet eyes to watch without being seen. The vehicles moved in perfect sequence, smooth and controlled, until they came to a stop directly in front of Nia's house, engines idling in a low synchronized rhythm that felt almost unreal against the quiet of the neighborhood. Doors opened in unison, the soft but precise sound breaking the silence as figures stepped out, dressed in tailored suits that caught the faint glow of streetlights, their posture straight, their movements measured, as if every second had been planned long before they arrived. At the center, a final door opened, slower than the rest, and the old man from the roadside stepped out. But there was nothing uncertain about him now, no trace of the hesitation that had marked him just hours before. He stood tall, his presence steady, his eyes fixed on the small house in front of him as if it held the answer to something far greater than a broken tire. Inside, Nia stirred slightly, a faint shift beneath the blanket as the unfamiliar vibration reached her, not loud enough to wake her fully, but enough to pull her from deep sleep into that quiet space between awareness and rest. Outside, one of the suited men stepped forward, speaking softly into a device, his voice calm and controlled, while another approached the walkway, pausing just short of the front steps, as if waiting for permission that had not yet been given. The old man remained still for a moment longer, taking in the worn edges of the house, the chipped paint, the dim light behind the curtain, details that most would overlook but that now seemed to hold weight, meaning, consequence. He exhaled slowly, not with fatigue but with decision, and began to walk forward, each step deliberate against the concrete path. The neighborhood had gone completely silent now, the kind of silence that listens, that waits, that knows something is happening even if it cannot yet understand what. Inside, Nia's eyes opened slowly, the faint glow of headlights slipping through the thin curtains and stretching across the wall in shifting patterns, unfamiliar and impossible to ignore, and for a brief second she remained still, her mind catching up to what her senses were already telling her. Outside, the man reached the door and lifted his hand, pausing just before knocking, as if the moment itself required precision, as if everything that came next depended on what happened in the next few seconds. And then finally, gently but unmistakably, he knocked. The knock echoed softly through the small house, not loud, not forceful, but precise enough to cut through the quiet like a signal that could not be ignored. And Nia Brooks sat up slowly in her bed, her heart picking up a steady rhythm as her eyes adjusted to the dim light stretching across her wall. The glow from outside no longer faint but clear, deliberate, impossible to mistake for anything ordinary. For a brief moment, she did not move, listening, the old fan humming in the corner, her mother's breathing steady in the next room, and beneath it all, the low, distant rumble of engines idling just beyond her front door. Another knock followed, just as controlled, just as patient, and Nia swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cool wooden floor grounding her as she stood, pulling her hoodie tighter around her shoulders before stepping into the narrow hallway. Each step felt measured, not from fear, but from the weight of something unknown waiting on the other side. She paused outside her mother's room, glancing in, ensuring she was still asleep, then continued forward, her hand brushing lightly along the wall as she approached the front door where the thin curtain beside it shifted slightly from the outside light. Through the fabric, shadows moved, not one, but many, tall shapes standing still, organized, waiting. Nia reached for the doorknob, her fingers hesitating for just a fraction of a second before turning it, the soft click sounding louder than it should have in the quiet space. The door opened slowly, inch by inch, revealing the scene outside in full clarity, the row of black vehicles lined along the curb, their surfaces reflecting the streetlights in smooth, polished lines, and the men standing beside them, composed, silent, their attention focused in one direction. On her porch stood the old man, but nothing about him felt the same. His posture was straight, his presence calm but commanding, the uncertainty from the roadside gone, replaced by something steady, something intentional. He met her eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the air between them holding the memory of the previous day, the dust, the heat, the quiet act that had connected them without explanation. Nia's grip on the door eased slightly as she took him in, her expression unreadable but steady, her voice finally breaking the silence, soft but clear. "Are you okay?" she asked, the question simple, almost out of place given everything surrounding them, but genuine in a way that could not be rehearsed. The man's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to reveal something beneath the surface, a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed between them. "I am now," he replied, his voice measured, deeper than before, carrying a calm authority that seemed to ripple outward into the stillness of the street. Behind him, the men remained motionless, the vehicles silent, the entire scene suspended as if waiting for what would come next. Nia glanced past him briefly, taking in the scale of it all, the number of cars, the unfamiliar precision, the quiet attention from neighbors watching. Behind curtains, and then her gaze returned to him, grounded, unshaken. "You did not have to come all this way," she said, not as a refusal, but as a statement, as if distance and effort still mattered more to her than whatever this moment might become. The man studied her for a second longer, then inclined his head slightly, a gesture small but deliberate, before stepping forward just enough to close the distance between them by a single step, careful, respectful, aware of the space he was entering. "I did," he said quietly, and in that moment, the weight of everything he had not yet said settled into the space between them, waiting to be revealed. The air held its breath as the man stood on the porch, the faint hum of the engines behind him blending into the stillness like a distant storm waiting just beyond the horizon, and Nia Brooks remained where she was, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the door, her posture calm but alert, her eyes steady on his, as if searching for something beneath the surface of his words. He glanced briefly over his shoulder, a subtle movement, but enough to signal the men behind him, and one of them stepped forward immediately, holding a slim black folder with both hands, as if it carried weight far beyond paper. The man took it without breaking eye contact with Nia, then opened it slowly, the soft sound of the hinge cutting through the quiet. "My name is Harold Whitmore," he said, his voice even, measured, carrying a presence that felt practiced, not rehearsed, but lived in, like someone used to being heard. Nia did not react to the name, not because she dismissed it, but because it did not yet mean anything to her world, and he seemed to notice that, a flicker of understanding crossing his expression before he continued. Yesterday, you stopped when no one else did, he said, not as praise, but as fact, and he turned the folder slightly, revealing a small embedded screen. With a single motion, he pressed it, and the screen came to life, showing footage from the side of the road, the angle wide, capturing the empty highway, the passing cars, the moments where drivers slowed just enough to look before continuing on. Their hesitation visible, their choice clear. Then the image shifted, and there she was, stepping into frame, small against the stretch of road, her movements simple, unguarded, real. Nia's eyes flicked down for a second, not surprised, but aware now that what she had thought was unseen had been witnessed all along. This was not an accident, Harold said quietly, closing the folder halfway, not hiding it, but no longer needing to prove what had already been shown. I have spent years trying to find people who act without expectation, people who choose to do what is right even when it costs them something. His words settled into the space between them, not heavy, but deliberate, each one placed with care. Nia shifted her weight slightly, her fingers brushing against the door as she processed what he was saying, her gaze lifting back to his, grounded, thoughtful. So you were testing people, she said, her tone calm, not accusing, but clear, and he nodded once, a small acknowledgement. Yes, he answered, without hesitation, and for a brief moment, something like discomfort passed through his eyes, not regret for the test itself, but for what it revealed about those who had failed it. The street behind him remained silent, the neighbors still watching, the line of vehicles unchanged, but the focus of everything had narrowed to the space between the two of them. Harold took a slow breath, then reached into the folder again, pulling out a document, crisp, precise, its edges sharp under the light. What you did yesterday, he continued, was not just kindness. It was clarity, and clarity is rare. He extended the document toward her, not forcing it into her hands, but offering it, leaving the choice entirely hers. Nia looked at it, then back at him, her expression steady, her voice quiet but firm. I did not do it for anything, she said, and the truth in her words landed with more weight than any gesture could have carried. Harold's grip on the paper softened slightly, and for the first time since he arrived, the structure of the moment shifted, not from his control, but from her refusal to be moved by it. He lowered the document just a fraction, studying her, not as a benefactor, not as a man offering something, but as someone trying to understand what could not be bought. And in that pause, something deeper began to unfold. The paper remained suspended between them, untouched, as the quiet stretched just a little longer, the kind of silence that did not demand to be filled, but instead revealed what words could not carry. And Nia Brooks slowly shook her head, not in rejection of him, but of the idea that what she had done could be measured or exchanged. Her hand rested lightly against the doorframe, grounding her, while her eyes stayed steady on his, clear and unwavering. Then why bring all of this here? She asked softly, her voice not challenging, just honest, as if she truly needed to understand the reason behind something that felt far removed from her world. Harold Whitmore lowered the document completely now, letting it rest at his side, the edges catching the faint glow of the streetlight, and for the first time, his posture shifted, just slightly, as if the structure he had arrived with was no longer enough to hold the moment. He glanced past her, just for a second, catching a glimpse of the small hallway, the worn floor, the quiet life that existed inside those walls, and when his gaze returned to her, there was something different in it, something less controlled, more human. Because I have seen what happens when people stop choosing, he said slowly, his voice quieter now, less formal, as if he was speaking from a place deeper than the one he had prepared. And yesterday you chose. The words settled between them, not as a statement of value, but as a recognition, and Nia's expression softened just a fraction, her shoulders easing as the weight of the moment shifted from expectation to understanding. Behind him, the men remained still, the vehicles silent, but the scene no longer felt like a display of power. It felt like a pause, a space where something real was being decided. Nia glanced down briefly, her fingers brushing against the edge of her sleeve, still faintly marked from the day before, Then she looked back up. People do that every day, she said quietly. They just do not always get seen. Harold exhaled softly, the faintest hint of a smile touching his expression, not because he disagreed, but because she had said something he already knew but had not heard spoken that way in a long time. You are right, he replied, his voice steady again, but different now, less distant. He took a step back, creating space between them, not as retreat, but as respect, as if acknowledging that whatever came next had to come from her, not from him. The document in his hand remained untouched, and slowly, deliberately, he closed the folder, the soft click echoing lightly in the still air. This is not about paying you, he continued, meeting her eyes again. It is about making sure that someone like you does not have to carry everything alone. The words lingered, not heavy, but meaningful, and for a moment, Nia did not respond, her gaze drifting past him toward the quiet street, the lined vehicles, the watching shadows behind curtains, and then back again, her expression thoughtful, measured. Inside the house, the faint sound of her mother shifting in bed carried softly through the hallway, a reminder of the life that waited just behind her, the responsibilities that did not pause for moments like this. Nia took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling gently, and then she stepped forward just slightly, enough to close the distance by a fraction, her voice calm, steady, and clear. If you really want to help, she said, then do not make it about yesterday. The air stilled again, the kind of stillness that listens, and Harold did not speak immediately, his eyes holding hers as the meaning of her words settled in, deeper than any agreement could reach. And in that quiet space, something shifted again, something neither of them had planned, but both now understood. The quiet did not break right away. It deepened, stretching between them like something alive, something listening, and Harold Whitmore stood still on the narrow porch, his gaze fixed on Nia Brooks, as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood about value, about help, about what could and could not be offered. Behind him, the line of black vehicles remained perfectly aligned, their engines now silent, the men beside them no longer shifting, no longer signaling, as if the entire operation had paused, waiting not for his command, but for her next word. Nia held her ground, her posture steady, her eyes calm, but there was a quiet intensity in the way she stood, the kind that did not demand attention but earned it without effort. And for a brief second, Harold looked down at the closed folder in his hand, then back up at her, something settling into place behind his expression. Then tell me what it should be about, he said, his voice lower now, stripped of presentation, of structure, just a man asking a question he did not have the answer to. The air shifted again, softer this time, and Nia glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway where a faint light still glowed from her mother's room, the sound of a gentle cough barely reaching the doorway before fading again into quiet. She turned back to him, her voice measured, not hurried, not uncertain. It should be about people who do not get a second chance, she said, each word clear, grounded in something lived rather than imagined. People who work, who try, and still fall behind because no one is looking when it matters. Harold listened without interrupting, his posture unchanged, but something in his eyes sharpened, not with control, but with attention, real attention, the kind that absorbs instead of evaluates. Nia continued, her tone steady, her hands relaxed at her sides. If you have all of this, she gestured lightly toward the street behind him, not dramatic, just acknowledging the presence of what he brought with him. Then use it where it changes something before it breaks. The words did not rise, they did not push, but they landed, solid and undeniable, and for a moment, the entire street seemed to hold them in place, as if even the night itself had paused to hear them fully. Harold exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him not as release, but as recognition, and he took a small step back, his shoulders easing in a way that suggested not retreat, but acceptance, as if the direction of the moment had shifted away from him entirely. He turned slightly, looking at the men, the vehicles, the structure he had brought with him, and then back at Nia, his voice quiet but clear. You are asking me to change the way I choose, he said, not as a challenge, but as understanding, and Nia gave a small nod, nothing more, because that was exactly what she meant. The silence returned again, but this time it felt different, not empty, not waiting, but full, as if something had already been decided even before it was spoken aloud. Harold looked at her for a second longer. Then slowly, deliberately, he opened the folder again, not to present what was inside, but to remove something. A single card, simple, unmarked except for a name and a number, and he stepped forward just enough to place it gently on the edge of the doorframe, not into her hand, not forcing acceptance, just leaving it there within reach. "Then help me see," he said quietly, and the weight of that request settled into the space between them, not as obligation, but as possibility, something unfinished, something that would not end with this moment, but begin because of it. The card rested lightly against the worn edge of the doorframe, unmoving, simple, almost out of place against the chipped paint and quiet weight of the house, and Nia Brooks did not reach for it right away, her eyes lingering on Harold Whitmore instead, as if the meaning of what he had just said mattered more than anything printed on that small piece of paper. The night air felt cooler now, the earlier tension dissolved into something steadier, something quieter, and for the first time since the line of vehicles arrived, the moment no longer felt like a spectacle, but like a conversation that had found its center. Nia shifted slightly, her fingers brushing the wood beside the card, not picking it up, just acknowledging it was there. Then she looked back at him, her expression thoughtful, grounded. "I am not the person you think I am," she said gently, her voice carrying no hesitation, just truth, and Harold's gaze did not waver, his response coming just as calmly. "You are exactly the person I think you are," he replied, not with insistence, but with quiet certainty, the kind that comes from seeing something clearly once and not needing to question it again. Behind him, one of the men glanced subtly toward the vehicles, as if expecting a signal, but none came, and the formation remained still, the entire scene now held in a pause that felt intentional. Nia glanced past Harold again, taking in the scale of what stood outside her small home, then back at the card, and this time she picked it up, turning it slightly between her fingers, feeling the smooth surface, the weight of possibility it represented, even if she had not yet decided what to do with it. Inside the house, the faint sound of movement came again from her mother's room, a soft shift of blankets, a reminder that the world inside those walls had not changed, not yet, and Nia's gaze softened for a moment before returning to Harold. "If I call," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "it will not be for me." The statement settled between them, clear, direct, and Harold nodded once, not surprised, not disappointed, as if he had expected nothing less. "That is exactly why you should," he answered quietly, and there was no pressure in his voice, no urgency, just agreement, the kind that meets someone where they stand instead of trying to move them. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was settled, complete in a way that did not need to be filled, and Harold took a step back, giving her space, his presence no longer pressing forward but easing away, the purpose of his arrival no longer about delivering something, but about receiving something he had not expected. He turned slightly, signaling with a small motion, and immediately the men behind him responded, doors opening once more, movements precise but quieter now, less imposing, as if even they understood that whatever had happened here was not meant to be overshadowed. The engine started again, low and controlled, the vehicles preparing to leave as seamlessly as they had arrived, and Harold paused one last time, looking back at Nia, not with authority, not with expectation, but with something closer to respect. "Good night, Nia," he said, her name spoken with intention, as if it mattered that he said it correctly, that he said it at all. Nia gave a small nod in return, her fingers still lightly holding the card, her posture steady as she watched him step away, the distance between them growing again, but no longer empty. One by one, the vehicles pulled away from the curb, their headlights fading down the quiet street until the night returned to what it had been before, still, calm, almost ordinary, except for the small card now resting in Nia's hand, and the feeling that something unseen had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that would not simply disappear with the morning light. The street returned to silence piece by piece, the last trace of engine noise fading into the distance until it was replaced by the familiar stillness of the neighborhood, the kind that settled into the cracks of the sidewalk and the quiet corners of small homes, and Nia Brooks stood in the doorway for a moment longer, the night air brushing lightly against her face as her fingers held the card without tightening around it, as if its weight was not something she needed to grasp to understand. The porch light flickered softly above her, casting a warm glow over the worn steps. And for a brief second, everything felt exactly the same as it had the night before. The same quiet street, the same small house, the same steady rhythm of life that asked for effort without promise. And yet something beneath it had shifted in a way that did not need to announce itself. She stepped back inside slowly, closing the door with a gentle push, the soft click marking the end of one moment and the quiet beginning of another. And as she moved through the narrow hallway, the card rested between her fingers, not forgotten, but not examined either, simply there, like a question she was not in a hurry to answer. In her mother's room, the dim light still glowed, and Nia paused at the doorway, watching her for a second, the rise and fall of her chest steady. The lines of exhaustion softened in sleep, and Nia stepped closer, adjusting the blanket slightly, her movements careful, practiced, the kind that came from doing the same small acts of care over and over without expecting recognition. She sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, the quiet wrapping around her again, and finally, she looked down at the card in her hand, turning it slowly, reading the name, the number, the simplicity of it all compared to everything that had surrounded it just minutes before. Her thumb brushed over the surface once. Then she set it gently on the small table beside the bed, not as rejection, but as choice, a decision to let it wait rather than letting it define what came next. Outside, the night deepened, the streetlights humming softly, the world continuing in its quiet way, and inside, Nia leaned back slightly, her eyes closing for just a moment as she took a slow breath, the kind that filled her chest without urgency. Morning would come, and with it, the same responsibilities, the same routine, the same challenges that had not disappeared simply because something unexpected had arrived at her door. And yet now there was something else too, not a solution, not a guarantee, but a possibility that existed because of a single moment on an empty road where she had chosen to stop. The camera of the world, if there had been one, would not linger on the card, or the name, or the distant memory of black vehicles disappearing into the night, but on the quiet image of her hand resting near her mother's, close enough to touch, not quite there yet, as if reminding herself that whatever came next would still begin right here, in this room, in this life, with the same simple choice she had always made, to care, to stay, to see, even when no one else was looking, and in that stillness, the kind that does not need words, the story did not end. It settled, waiting, like light just beginning to find its way through the edge of a new day.